Hey guys, how's it going?
Good man. I just realized, do we have you at like an absurdly early time in the morning for you right now?
It is. It's like 5 a.m. But I wake up really early anyway.
What
I'm a
you're a
morning
G, man. Good
morning
God.
guy.
I've literally spent the first 3 weeks of the stream complaining about having to be up and live on the internet at 8 a.m. And I'm happy to report that I feel like I'm a morning person now. 11 a.m. has transformed my life. I'm a morning
Good. Well,
person
you
now.
should start a podcast on that. Just how, you can be a wellness guy.
Brother, do not encourage me. I think my team will kill me if I try to go start any more podcasts. So, Josh, when do you kick us off and we'll dive in?
Yeah, so Nick, you're the COO at Celestia, which is a modular data availability network that makes it easy for anyone to launch their own blockchain. So you guys power projects like Abstract, Kamigotchi, which we're investors in Love, Towns, and a bunch of others. So yeah, you guys are building towards a vision of this like modular blockchain future where apps vertically integrate, own their stack. It's a future we're really excited by as well. So wondering if you could start off by just kind of catching us up on the state of the app chain thesis and your thinking around it.
Sure. So, yeah, you explained it really well. Essentially, what Celestia is like the first L1 blockchain that's been built for a future where apps are deployed as these vertically integrated application specific like chains, essentially. So, rather than being a smart contract where you only get a little bit of exposure to the kind of functionality that you can implement when you build an app chain, you can choose and customize everything essentially from the sequencing to the economics to the execution model, and that just unlocks a bunch of different features. And Celestia, when you want to build apps in that way, you would design the L1 in a completely different way as well, where it's just about raw block space or blobs, and it's about making that also extremely scalable, because if one of these applications actually reaches any mass scale, they're going to need tons and tons of throughput. So that's the vision that Celestia is building for. And I think the thesis is just get stronger every month. I think it's played out a little bit slower than I was expecting, in the sense that um, the adoption of crypto is also playing out a little bit slower. So we're kind of just in general, I think that the space is sort of like hurry up and wait. And there's always like this lag between building the next wave of infrastructure that we know we'll need in the future when we get there, and then when the actual apps come out that get us there. So there's sort of been like I would say like maybe an overbuild of infrastructure for what we need right now. But then in a year from now, if stablecoins take off, or I don't know, some of the consumer apps that you guys are helping to incubate take off, then like we won't have enough. But overall, like things like Robinhood launching an L2, like a bunch of enterprises building stuff. A lot of the top applications in the Solana and Ethereum ecosystem, their natural step of evolution after building a successful smart contract is to deploy an application specific chain or roll up. So we're seeing that with teams like Athena, or with Helium in the Solana ecosystem, and a bunch of the Solana dexes. And something we can get into, which is I'm very bullish on this wave of clobs. So like Hyperliquid's kind of like opened up this new frontier of building on-chain like exchanges that are actually almost feature parity with centralized exchanges. And these make sense as application specific chains. They need a lot of throughput, and so we're working with a bunch of those teams to build clobs on Celestia as a way to hopefully take market share from centralized exchanges and bring that back to a more non-custodial, more verifiable substrate for trading. And that's, I feel like if crypto can't deliver on the promise of making exchanges and the actual trading of crypto on chain, then I think we're missing a major opportunity, because I feel like that's like the first thing that we should be able to like successfully do. If we're going to bring the rest of finance on chain, we better at least be able to bring crypto trading on chain first.
What is the big unlock there in your mind? Because I think that is a niche debate, but is picking up a lot of steam. Can you sort of lay out the groundwork there for us?
For sure, yeah. So people have been trying to build CLOBs from the beginning. In fact, I think even before there was an idea of an automated market maker like Uniswap, people, I think Ether Delta was one of the first ones trying to build a central limit order book on chain on Ethereum. The thing is that when the block times are so slow and the gas fees are so high, it just doesn't make any sense, because you put an order out there and then 15 seconds later your order is like totally stale, and then you lose a bunch of money because someone is able to snipe it, and the fees for placing those trades just becomes too expensive. So you needed a little bit more of like a passive automated way to have a market on chain, and that's why things like Uniswap were more successful in the previous era of crypto. But I'm not sure. People do make arguments that there are still advantages to AMMs, and I think there are things you can probably do on an AMM that you can't do on a CLOB. But as far as there's a reason why TradFi runs on CLOBs. Now and what CLOBs need essentially to be successful is really low latency, because that's how you ensure that the orders are actually fresh and there's actual you're close to the actual price discovery, the real price of those assets. And then you need a few other things to make an on-chain CLOB successful too. So one would be the economics. So you want to make it so that the exchange, when you're trading, you probably don't want to have to pay gas every time you place and cancel an order. You want to make the fees such that you're paying for like the volume, right? In the same way that normal exchanges charge their users. And you can't, if you're building on a general purpose chain, you can't just bypass the gas fees. That's already baked into the chain. And then one of the other features that's really important is something that Hyperliquid innovated, which is cancel prioritization. So it's a special custom sequencing where if I'm a very sophisticated market maker and I put an order on chain, I'm trying to make the market, and it turns out that the market moved against me in between the now and the last block time, I should be able to remove that order before someone who's equally sophisticated snipes it and arbs it, so that way it can be more profitable for people who want to add liquidity, and also that makes the spreads tighter and everything cheaper for the users who are just trading, who are not these sophisticated people. So all of those things essentially require a bunch of customization that you can't get when you're building on a general purpose chain. The other thing is on the latency point. If you're building specifically a rollup, you can have extremely low latency by having either a single sequencer or a small set of co-located sequencers. And you can't do that on a globally distributed L1 like Ethereum or Solana, because your validator set is just spread all over the world. And there's just, the speed of light is a constraint. And if you have to come to consensus, even if you can do sort of confirmations that are fast, sort of before reaching full consensus finality, you're ultimately, because the leader moves around the world every epoch, then the people who want to co-locate with you and get that ultra low latency don't really have the convenience of that. They're not able to. So it kind of, you end up with a very high latency threshold, like maybe 100 milliseconds or something like that, or 200. And with a co-located sort of sequencer, it can be as low as 5 milliseconds, which is on parity with Binance. So
let's go. We're learning lessons here. This is one of those things where I think I had a high level understanding of, but I think it's going to pop up quite a bit in the discourse over the next little while, especially as this on-chain economy just absolutely grows. I want to sort of maybe change a little bit here. We've talked a lot this week about the pump launch, and I think part of this broader revenue meta that's emerging here right now, which is kind of a rejection of the fat protocol thesis at some
Mhm.
level. And the idea that I guess infrastructure is valuable just because it's used versus valuable because it's actually throwing meaningful economic value back to its token holders or owners in some way. So I'm curious about how you think about that as in the context of Celestia. Is this sort of a bygone era of crypto, and now we're stepping into one where investors are just going to demand revenues coming back, or and maybe this is sort of like a way of getting at a question around thinking about how the token and Celestia really supports the bigger goals of your organization.
So the question is like the fat app thesis versus fat protocol, or
I think
okay.
sure. That's yeah.
I mean, kind of like, does Celestia, like, do you need to go become a great business, or can you just be really successful and sustainable as, widely used kind of infrastructure that maybe actually doesn't capture a ton of value or like revenue from, everyone building on top of you?
Yeah, good question. So the way that I see it is that we are exiting an era where L1s made money via excessive priority fees and MEV. And so that's pretty bearish for, chains that predicated their income on that. Like, Ethereum kind of went through this transition, right, in 2021 and earlier. Like, it was printing money because it had a monopoly on where people wanted to do DeFi on chain, and people were willing to pay a ton of money. And there was a lot of MEV. I think Solana then kind of like inherited that simultaneously as Ethereum kind of transitioned to the L2 like rollup centric roadmap, and a lot of that MEV went to the L2s instead, like Arbitrum or Base or what have you. But I think in general, like in my opinion, the base layers, the infrastructure is not going to be the ones who capture MEV. It will be applications, and I think a lot of that value goes to the applications, which is really good for applications. And so then the question is, well, what is the next revenue model for L1s and like infrastructure? And to me, it's more like the equivalent of, well, at least Celestia's like business model is going to be more like the equivalent of AWS, where it's like we have this AWS has a bunch of raw compute, and any developer can tap into that and pay to use the compute that's available on AWS to run their applications. And at scale, it's actually extremely profitable business. But AWS can be profitable because the amount of demand there is to transact or like run applications on the web is just ginormous, right? And so I think that the equivalent business model for Celestia or the future of infrastructure like L1s is the same, where it's a bet on enormous demand for block space in the future as like Web3 evolves and like turns into what I think we all are hoping it turns into. So like the success case for Celestia and where the economics do really work out is when we're targeting, for example, like right now we're at 1 megabyte per second of DA throughput, and in the future, like what we want to get to is 1 gigabyte per second. And I don't even think that is going to be enough to meet the world's demand for block space in the long-term future. So anyway, like and then 1 gigabyte, 1 megabyte of DA per second is about 10K TPS. So 1 gigabyte is like 10 million or whatever, right? So that's kind of like the world that we see ourselves going towards. And again, like that sounds crazy, but even with just CLOBs, this use case, like if we move crypto trading on chain, like we're gonna have millions of TPS just from that. And then imagine if you're gonna get that from if you start putting more of finance, traditional finance on chain, all of payments, and then you start going into some of the more like far out ideas that I do think will come to pass, whether that's metaverse style things, or I don't know, you start to have things that are like DAOs and network states and like just the sort of like really far out sci-fi almost visions of crypto, you can get to some pretty crazy ideas of where block space demand could get to. And so that's sort of like where, and I do think that these protocols need to be at least at minimum economically sustainable. And then it's possible in my view that they can become actually very like profitable and generate a lot of revenue. And I'll say like a couple other things just for Celestia specifically. One is we've intentionally set our fees extremely low to start, because we believe that actually like the L1s are a network effects business, where the network effect is essentially, I mean, there's a lot of them. Some of them are like less strict, kind of like AWS. Like AWS does have a network effect. It charges significantly more than any other, than many of its peer cloud providers. And that's because of the integrations and the brand around it and the tooling. But I think that so that'll probably be the case for DA layers as like Celestia as well. But I think it will go even deeper than that, which is what blockchains really are, is about having a shared truth that anyone can tap into, and not just anyone who wants to verify things and have security that like the application they're using, whether that's a financial one or a non-financial one, is like has integrity, but also between the applications themselves, they're going to want to know, hey, I'm this, cloud chain, and I want to interact with this lending pool that's on a different chain. Are these things fully like legit and secure before I move funds? And so like you're going to start to have this network effect of like the more applications that co-locate on one L1 DA layer, the more of an incentive and a reason there is for the next marginal application to also want to co-locate. So we see this as like very much a network effects business. So anyway, we have the fees set intentionally, basically very close to zero, just as spam prevention, to try to incentivize and attract more and more growth and usage. So in the future, we'll have to find some fair way to price it, and then that will maybe make the economics be a little bit more attractive. And then the last thing I'll say is that we're also exploring this interesting idea called proof of governance, which is where you can eliminate a lot of the economic drag of staking and like move issuance from, let's say, 6% or 8% of the total token supply every year to pay to stakers for security. You can reduce that down to, let's say, 0.25%. So like a very like a massive reduction, like 20x or more. And that means that it will require significantly less revenue to become profitable. So like the economics of the chain just start to, like the operating costs just like drop by that much. So that means that the amount of revenue you need to become profitable is just that much less as well.
Awesome, Nick. We're gonna have to let you go here, man. We got
Okay.
Savik to come up, but I'm left with like a million questions and a much longer conversation to be had. So hopefully we can get you back on. And we got through 2 of the questions you wrote here, Josh. There's just too many.
That's my bad for being so long-winded.
No.
I appreciate you guys.
Interesting to me. Nick, appreciate you hopping on, man. And I mean, the conversation we had at the conference that we're at, after sitting around the table, listening to these leaders of all sorts of new emergent blockchains, et cetera, and just the focus on building on everybody needing to win find the killer consumer app. And I think our mutual sort of confusion over the lack of forethought around what happens next once they have the killer consumer app is maybe a conversation for a future time. But
Yes.
Anyways, let's leave it there, Nick. Thanks for getting up early for us, my man. And
cheers, guys.
Talk to you soon.
Appreciate it.
Peace, man.
Bye.